like I said before, with Shechem, it's a place of significance. It's a place where Abraham first rendered an offering to God after he was called up and out of Haran, and he was on his way, and he took Sarai, his wife, and he dwelt there in Shechem and made an altar for the Lord and laid an offering for the Lord. Shechem is a place of beginning. And then also earlier in the book of Joshua, where's my note? In 20, when Joshua was saying, okay, we have to select locations that are safe places, that if we find ourselves in dangers, find ourselves in trouble, we can get to. And of those places that he lists, one of which is Shechem in verse 7 of chapter 20. So he's calling together all of the tribes of Israel. And so then he shares God's message. God didn't start with Egypt, like we sometimes have a habit to do. Like, he's brought us out of Egypt. God said, yeah, I brought you out of Egypt. But before that, and before that too, I brought Abram out of Haran, out of worshiping other gods to me, and he went all over this land of Canaan that you've been wandering, and he started here at Shechem. And that's how it began. God took Abraham on a spiritual makeover beginning in Canaan. Although he was old and had no children at the time, Abraham was blessed by God to have a son, who was Isaac, by his wife Sarah. And it's interesting that God mentions Abraham's many descendants before mentioning Isaac. Verses 4 to 10 of our background text, Joshua continued to share God's recounting of Israel's journey up until this point. So it's not just, I took Abraham out of Haran and gave him Isaac. And then Isaac had his own journey and had his children. And then Jacob and Esau had their own journey and had their children. And then Joseph, and then Egypt, and then the plagues, and then the crossing over into the wilderness, and then your craziness at Canaan the first time when I told you go get it and you didn't get it, and then your 40 years of wandering, and then coming to this place now. It was a total recount of all the things that God had done, and he's calling them now to this place. So the question in your book, the reason I wanted the teacher's book is the teacher's book has a young adult question. And the young adult question says, commitment seems to be a lost word in our language today, especially in marriages. What can the church do to pass on God's word to this generation concerning commitment in this area? I'm going to rephrase that question just to say commitment in general. What can we do as examples, as teachers, as parents, as grandparents, to emphasize commitment? To follow through on what we say, to be an example, be what you say, do what you say you're going to do, and mean it. To paraphrase and steal the title, keep your promises. A lot of times we find ourselves, I'll do it, and we say it passively, and then people are expecting us to do something, and we don't. I had a coworker today call me, mind you, her office is about as far from me as Minister Anthony is. She calls me just for the sake of calling me to say, Jonathan, you were supposed to do this. I was. I forgot. I completely forgot about it. So many things going on at work here, whatever. I forgot about it. So it was timely enough that I could still get it done and let her know what she'd wanted me to let her know. But I said I was going to do something and I didn't do it. And I really don't like doing that. She will be the first person to tell you that in our family, your word is your bond. If somebody says that they're going to do something, the expectation is that it gets done. Now, I am a procrastinator. I admit that fully. I try not to do it as much as I did in school. Thankfully, my job is so high volume that I can't afford to do it, so that's helping. But what happens is I'll say I'm going to do something, and then people start asking, when am I going to do it? And my favorite phrase is, it'll get done. I'm working on that. But the concept is that I gave my word. I'm going to do it. Timing might be something I need to work on, but it will get done. And that's kind of the concept of commitment. You said it's going to happen. You said you're going to do it. Do it. Because with young people, you say, oh, I'm going to do something, and then you forget about it. Their hopes are up. Now their hopes are down. And it builds a trust issue of how can I trust you if I can't trust your word? And as it comes into the adult question, it's compare and contrast them coming back to Shechem as renewing vows. If this is the place where it all started, coming back to this place ought to have some sort of spiritual significance. But in renewing vows, I've never been married, so I don't have vows to renew. Do people come back to that place with that same sense of devotion to each other? Do people come back to that place with that same sense of love for one another? Or are we coming back to this Shechem to rekindle that which was lost? Are we coming back to this Shechem to remind us of how far we've fallen? Are we coming back to this Shechem just because it's what everyone else has been doing in the last few years and now it's a trend? It's a matter of saying, okay, Shechem is this place where God is addressing his people because this is a place of serious significance. However, why are we here? What preparations are we making to come here? What is our reasoning for gathering here? And are our reasons clogging our ears? Are our reasons saying, I'm here because everybody else is here. I'm here because I'm always here. I'm here because this is what they told me to do. Or am I here because I want to be here? And in this case, everybody's gathered together to hear from not Joshua, God. And so as they stand there and God gives the whole litany of events that led their people from Abram all the way to Joshua, they're reminded of their part in the story. They're reminded of how larger the story is outside of themselves. And they're here and they're listening. And we get to verses 13 through 15. And I like this part because it just sounds so parental. I've given you land that you didn't have to labor for, cities that you didn't build, but you dwell in them, vineyards and olive yards that you didn't plant, but you eat. Now, therefore, fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and in truth, and put away the gods which your fathers served on the other side of the flood and in Egypt, and serve ye the Lord. To paraphrase, after all I've done for you, I've brought you out of oppression. I've seen you out of genocide. I've allowed you to conquer things greater than you. I've stopped the flood when it should have wiped you out. I've called you out of darkness into the marvelous light. I've done so much for you. But if you want to go to the other side of the flood, where oppression is just a daily struggle, if you want to go to the other side of the flood and worship the idols of the Egyptians, if you want to go to the other side of the floods and suffer for the sake of suffering, if you want to go to the other side of the flood and starve for the sake of starving, if you want to go to the other side of the flood where Pharaoh and his army drowned, where there was nothing but sickness and sorrow and disease, if you want to go to the other side of the flood, that's fine. But I want you to go remembering how far I've brought you so far. So as for me and my house, Joshua says, even if it seems evil to you to serve the Lord, choose ye this day who you will serve, whether it's the God of your fathers who served on the other side of the floods, or the God of the Amorites in whose land we dwell. But for me and my house, I serve the Lord. You have the free function to choose whatever you want to do, And he's saying this to everybody. It's not a one-on-one conversation. It's not even an argument. It's very simply put, choose today. Do you choose to be with God? Stop the flood. Created heaven and earth. Let's just start and stop there. Called everything out of nothing. Or do you want to just go back to the other side of the flood? Choice is yours. I'm not going to beat it over your head. I'm not going to string you up and drag you up and down the road to make you understand or agree with me. Choose. After everything that God has done, personally, historically, scripturally, universally, after everything that God has done, choose. That's what Joshua is saying to the people. In your book, you'll find it says, after recounting how Israel had arrived in the promised land, God makes it plain in verse 13, the Israelites didn't do anything special to deserve it, to claim it, to win it, to conquer it, to be in it, to exist in it. They've done nothing special. It was all because of God's doing. And what's even more amazing, that it seemed like Israel would occupy Egypt at the death of Jacob, but we also recognize God's promise to Abraham. It's just a matter of God's timing for Israel to occupy the promised land. And if we really think about it, if God had allowed the timing of Israel, had allowed the Israelites to settle without struggle, they would have believed that it was their own might and cunning which led them to the land overflowing with milk and honey. And there's this concept that my generation is entitled because we've had it so easy. I'm not going to say whether or not that concept is true or false, or that the generation behind me has it also easy or easier, and I'm not going to say whether or not that is true or false. But I can understand that the idea of ease brings comfort, and comfort brings complacency. If I've always had everything handed to me, I'm going to walk around with my hand out. If I've always had to work for something, I'm always going to put my boots to the ground. Whatever I become used to, I'm raised to be used to, I'm conditioned to be used to, I'm programmed to be used to. If I become used to thanking God for everything, I'm going to enter every situation thankfully. If I've been used to blaming God for everything, I'm going to enter every situation blaming God for everything. If I've been raised to keep my word, every time I give my word, I'm going to do my best to keep my word. If I've been raised that there's no point in telling the truth, every word out of my mouth will be for my benefit, not the benefit of the hearer. How I've been raised dictates how I see the world, and this generation was raised in the wilderness. You say it, this generation is the one that knew manna from heaven and clothes that didn't wear out. But at chapter 24, this is the generation that went from being a nomadic, wilderness, wandering people to conquerors. There was a struggle. Yes, there were times when it was just given to them, and then they got complacent. And the same things that they overcame began to overcome them, and they had to realign themselves with God. Complacency and worship don't go hand in hand. Complacency and understanding that God is in control don't go hand in hand, because then we start to think, I did it. Or, more dangerously, God owes it to me. Not so.